My best friend of 57 years just died. Here's what I learned. I'm 80. I'm 80 years old now, and for the first time in more than half a century, there is someone missing from my life in a way I still don't fully understand. My best friend of 57 years is gone. Writing that feels heavier than saying it out loud. When someone has been with you for most of your adult life, their absence doesn't feel like a single loss. It feels like many small losses happening all at once. We met when we were 23, young enough to believe time was endless, old enough to think we already understood life. We didn't meet in any special way, no dramatic story, no instant connection. We just kept showing up in the same places, kept talking, kept staying. That's how the strongest friendships begin, not with intensity, but with consistency. Back then, we talked about everything. Our dreams were big and our plans were messy. We believed effort alone guaranteed success. We believed friendships, once formed, took care of themselves. We didn't know how wrong we were about the second part. Life moved forward quickly. Careers started, responsibilities grew, families formed. Time that once felt unlimited slowly became something we scheduled around. We didn't notice the shift at first. It happens quietly. One missed call becomes two. One delayed visit becomes a habit. But the bond felt strong, so we never questioned it. That's the dangerous part about long friendships. They feel permanent, unbreakable. You assume they can survive neglect because they've survived everything else. And for a long time they do, or at least you think they do. We didn't talk every day. Sometimes weeks passed without a word, sometimes months. But whenever we reconnected, it felt familiar, comfortable. I took that familiarity as proof that nothing was changing. I told myself, we're fine. I didn't realize that fine is not the same as intentional. As the years passed, our conversations slowly changed, not in content, but in energy. We repeated stories more often. We laughed about forgetting names, dates, details. We joked about getting old. Humor became our way of avoiding a harder truth. Time was no longer on our side. The last decade of our friendship was quieter than the rest, not worse, just quieter. We were both tired in different ways. Life had taken its toll, and I convinced myself that quiet meant stable, that silence meant comfort. I didn't understand that silence can also mean distance growing unnoticed. The last time I saw him, there was nothing remarkable about the day. No warning, no sense of finality. We sat in his living room, talking about ordinary things, weather, news, old memories we'd already told 100 times. I remember thinking I should come by more often. I remember thinking I'll make more time. That thought felt responsible, mature, reasonable. It was also meaningless, because thoughts don't create memories, actions do. When I got the call that he had passed, I didn't react the way people expect you to. I didn't cry right away. I didn't collapse. I just sat there, holding the phone, staring at the wall. It felt like someone had removed a load-bearing beam from my life, and everything was still standing, but weaker. What shocked me most wasn't the sadness. It was the realization that there would be no more chances, no more casual calls, no more "we should get together soon," no more shared understanding without explanation. 57 years of shared history had ended without ceremony. In the days that followed, memories started appearing without invitation. Not the big ones, not the dramatic moments, the small ones. Inside jokes no one else would ever understand. Long silences that felt comfortable instead of awkward. Being known without having to speak. Those were the things that hurt the most. I realized something uncomfortable.
My friend had been a witness to my life. He remembered the versions of me that no one else did, the young man I was before responsibility hardened me, the mistakes I never talked about, the hopes I quietly abandoned. With his passing, that entire archive disappeared. We talk about losing people, but we don't talk enough about losing witnesses, losing someone who remembers who you were when you didn't yet know who you were going to become. That kind of loss doesn't announce itself loudly. It settles in slowly, like dust. At 80, grief feels different than it did when I was younger. It's not explosive, it's reflective. It forces you to look backward more than forward. It makes you inventory your life, not by accomplishments, but by connections. And when I did that, I realized how rare a friendship like ours truly was. 57 years is not built on excitement. It's built on tolerance, on forgiveness, on staying when leaving would have been easier, on accepting changes without demanding explanations. We didn't always agree, we didn't always understand each other, but we stayed. And yet, I can't escape the feeling that I didn't stay as well as I could have, that I assumed time would always be generous, that I postponed presence because I believed history could replace effort. I was wrong. This loss didn't teach me anything new. It reminded me of something I already knew but had stopped practicing. Relationships don't survive on memory. They survive on attention. And attention, once withheld for too long, cannot be reclaimed. As I sit here now, I think about how many conversations we never had, not because we avoided them, but because we assumed there would be more time. That assumption is the quiet enemy of every long relationship. I'm 80 years old, and for the first time, I truly understand that longevity does not guarantee permanence. Even the strongest bonds need care. Even the longest friendships need intention. This is what losing my best friend of 57 years has taught me so far. And there is more I'm only beginning to understand.
After the funeral, life didn't stop. That was the part that confused me the most. The world kept moving at the same pace, even though something essential in my life had ended. People offered condolences, shared memories, shook my hand, and then returned to their routines. I did the same. But inside, something had shifted permanently. Grief at this age doesn't arrive as chaos. It arrives as reflection. You don't scream at the unfairness of it. You sit quietly with the truth of it. I found myself replaying years instead of days, decades instead of moments, not looking for mistakes, just understanding. I began thinking about how easy it was to assume our friendship would always be there. We had survived marriages, divorces, career changes, relocations, long silences. That history gave me a false sense of security. I treated the friendship like something already earned, rather than something still alive and requiring care. We often confuse history with effort. We believe shared pasts can replace present attention. They can't. There were times when he reached out and I was distracted, times when I said I'd call back and didn't, times when I shortened conversations because something else felt more urgent. None of those moments felt important on their own. That's what makes them dangerous. Regret is rarely born from one big failure. It's built from small neglect repeated over time. As I thought back, I realized how often I had assumed he understood that I was busy, understood that I cared, understood that time didn't reflect importance. But understanding has limits. Even strong relationships feel strain when effort becomes one-sided. In our later years, he was the one who called more often, the one who suggested meeting up, the one who remembered dates.
I noticed it, but instead of adjusting, I accepted it. I let him carry more of the connection than I should have. I never asked how that felt for him. When you've known someone for as long as we had, it's easy to skip questions. You think you already know the answers. But people change, needs change. Silence doesn't always mean contentment. Sometimes it means exhaustion. The last few conversations we had were polite, warm, but shorter. I assumed that was age. I assumed it was natural. What I didn't consider was that maybe he was getting tired of reaching out, tired of initiating, tired of being the one who kept the bridge intact. That thought has stayed with me, not as guilt, but as responsibility recognized too late. I've learned that friendship is not measured by how long it lasts, but by how evenly it's carried. When one person holds most of the weight for too long, something weakens, even if it doesn't break outright. After his death, I started noticing how many relationships in my life followed the same pattern: long history, minimal maintenance, assumed permanence. I realized I had relied too heavily on the past to excuse my absence in the present. At 80, you begin to see patterns clearly. Too clearly. You see how habits formed decades ago quietly shape your endings. You see how postponement slowly becomes neglect without ever announcing itself. I thought about all the some days we talked about, trips we never took, meals we never shared, conversations we kept saving for later because there was no rush. There was always a next time, until there wasn't. What hurts most is not the things we missed doing, it's the assumption that missing them didn't matter. That assumption robbed those moments of urgency while they were still available. People tell you to cherish your friendships. That advice sounds simple, almost obvious. But cherishing doesn't mean thinking fondly of someone. It means choosing them in real time. It means inconvenience. It means effort without immediate reward. I didn't always choose that. Losing my best friend didn't just make me sad, it made me aware of how easily meaningful relationships can fade, without drama, without conflict, without intention, just through neglect disguised as comfort. At this stage of life, there's no illusion of starting over, there's only honesty. And honesty tells me this: I treated time like a guarantee instead of a gift, and guarantees do not exist in human relationships. My friend was patient, loyal, present, more than I deserved at times. And now, in his absence, I feel the imbalance clearly, not as blame, but as truth. This loss has forced me to reconsider how I show up for the people still here. Not with promises, not with good intentions, but with presence, because presence is the only thing that can't be replaced later. 57 years of friendship ended quietly. No dramatic goodbye, no final conversation filled with wisdom, just an ordinary ending to an extraordinary bond. And that ordinariness is what makes it unbearable, because it reminds me that extraordinary things don't demand attention. They simply ask not to be ignored.
There is a stage of grief that doesn't look like sadness. It looks like awareness. That's the stage I'm in now. Not overwhelmed by loss, but permanently changed by it. When someone who has been part of your life for nearly 6 decades disappears, you don't just lose them, you lose the version of yourself that existed with them. I started noticing how often my thoughts drifted backward, not to relive the past, but to understand it. I wasn't searching for dramatic mistakes, I was looking for patterns. And once you see patterns clearly, you can't unsee them. The pattern was simple and uncomfortable. I assumed important relationships could survive on history alone. I believed shared years were enough to protect us from distance. I treated time like a renewable resource instead of what it really is, a constantly shrinking one.
When you're young, time feels abstract. When you're old, it becomes physical. You feel it in your body. You see it in your calendar. You notice how quickly weeks disappear, and you finally understand that someday is not a plan, it's an excuse. My friend and I had built a lifelong connection, but in the final years, I relied on memory more than effort. I thought fondness was enough. I thought loyalty was automatic. I forgot that relationships are living things. They don't end suddenly, they weaken quietly. I also realized how rarely we talked about fear, not because we didn't have any, but because admitting it felt unnecessary. We'd known each other too long, or so I thought. But fear doesn't disappear with familiarity, it just becomes unspoken. I wonder now how often he felt lonely even though he wasn't alone. How often he picked up the phone and hesitated. How often he wondered whether reaching out again would be a burden. Those questions have no answers anymore, and unanswered questions age you faster than time itself. At 80, you begin to understand something deeply unfair. Clarity arrives when choice is limited. Wisdom shows up when opportunity is nearly gone. You finally see what matters most, just as your ability to act on it fades. I used to believe regret came from obvious mistakes, affairs, betrayals, conflicts, but that's not where the real damage hides. Real regret grows in neutral spaces, in moments that feel harmless: skipped calls, delayed visits, shortened conversations, assumptions made without confirmation. None of those moments seemed important at the time. That's what makes them lethal. If my friend had died after an argument, I might have had a story to tell myself, a narrative, a justification, but there was no conflict, no unresolved anger, just an absence of attention spread thin over too many years. That's a harder thing to carry, because there's no one to blame, not even time, just priorities. I began paying attention to how people around me live now. Everyone is busy. Everyone is distracted. Everyone believes they're doing their best. And maybe they are, but effort aimed in the wrong direction still misses what matters. We are taught to protect our careers, our health, our finances. We are rarely taught how to protect continuity, how to keep people close over long periods of time, how to maintain depth when novelty fades. My friend and I didn't lose our bond because we stopped caring. We lost parts of it because we stopped nurturing it with the same seriousness we gave to other responsibilities. And here's the truth most people don't want to hear. Caring is not the same as showing up. Love is not proven by intention. It's proven by behavior repeated over time. I had intentions, plenty of them. I intended to call more, to visit more, to slow down. But intention without action is just a comforting story we tell ourselves. If you're listening to this and thinking, this won't happen to me, I understand. I thought the same thing. Strong friendships feel immune to neglect. They aren't. They're just more patient. Patience, however, has limits. At this stage of life, the loss of a longtime friend also brings another realization. They were a mirror. They reflected parts of me I no longer see anywhere else. When that mirror breaks, you feel less defined, less grounded, like something essential is missing, not externally, but internally. My friend remembered my parents, my early dreams, my first failures. Without him, those memories feel less anchored, less real. It's as if parts of my past now exist only in my mind, and that makes them fragile. This is something no one warns you about. Losing people isn't just about missing them. It's about losing shared memory, losing context, losing proof that your life unfolded the way you remember it. At 80, you don't measure life by what you accomplished. You measure it by who remains, and every loss changes that equation permanently. I don't share this story to inspire sadness. I share it to create interruption, to pause someone mid-scroll, mid-rush, mid-excuse, because reflection delayed is regret rehearsed. You don't need a dramatic reason to reach out to someone you care about. You don't need perfect timing. You don't need a long conversation. You just need presence. I wish I had understood sooner that longevity is not maintained by affection alone. It's maintained by effort when it's inconvenient, by choosing people even when life offers easier distractions. My best friend of 57 years is gone, and what he left me with is not just grief, but clarity. Clarity that arrived late, but still arrived. And now, there is one final lesson still unfolding.
At 80 years old, mornings feel quieter than they used to. Not because the world has changed, but because fewer people are left who truly know who you are. When my best friend died, the silence wasn't loud, it was gentle, and somehow that made it heavier. Grief at this age doesn't arrive as chaos, it arrives as inventory. You start counting what remains: people, memories, time. And when you do that honestly, you realize how little room there is left for delay. I don't wake up crying, I wake up remembering, and remembering is harder. I remember how easily we laughed in our 20s, how we thought life would slow down later, how we believed we would have time for everything important. We weren't careless, we were human, and that's the danger. Humanity assumes continuity where none is guaranteed. One of the hardest lessons I've learned is this: the people you think will always be there are often the ones you check on the least, not because they matter less, but because they feel safe, familiar, permanent. Nothing is permanent. In the final years of my friend's life, nothing dramatic happened. There was no falling out, no harsh words, no goodbye speech, just gradual distance disguised as normal life. That's how most meaningful relationships fade, not with explosions, but with erosion. And erosion doesn't feel dangerous while it's happening. If you had asked me 5 years ago whether I valued my friend, I would have said yes without hesitation, and I would have meant it. But value is not measured by feeling, it's measured by attention. Attention is time made visible. I gave my attention to many things I thought were important: responsibilities, routines, comfort. I assumed my friend understood. I assumed he knew where he stood in my life. But assumptions don't comfort people. Presence does. When he died, what haunted me most wasn't what I did wrong, but what I failed to do intentionally. I never said, "You matter to me," not because it wasn't true, but because I thought it was obvious. Nothing that matters should be left unsaid. At this age, you realize something else, too. People don't need you forever. They just need you now. And now doesn't repeat endlessly. I often think about how many moments we postpone without realizing they are final opportunities. The last casual lunch, the last unplanned visit, the last chance to listen without distraction. You don't know they're the last while they're happening. That's what makes them sacred and dangerous. Losing a lifelong friend also teaches you humility. It strips away the illusion that you are always present, always generous, always attentive. It forces you to see yourself clearly, not as a villain, but as a flawed human who believed there would always be more time. There isn't. At 80, time doesn't feel short in a dramatic way. It feels precious in a quiet one. You stop asking what's next and start asking who's left. And then comes the responsibility of carrying what you've learned. I don't want my friend's death to end with sadness alone. I want it to serve as a warning, gentle enough to be heard, but strong enough to interrupt someone else's future regret. If you are younger than me, and you are, listen carefully. Do not wait for a reason to call someone you love. Do not wait until life slows down. It won't. Life only speeds up. Do not assume strong bonds are self-sustaining. They aren't. They survive on choice. Choose people. Choose them when it's inconvenient, when you're tired, when there's nothing exciting to say, when silence feels awkward, when routine tempts you to delay.
Those are the moments that build permanence. My best friend of 57 years knew me in ways no one else ever will. With him, I didn't perform, I existed. And losing that kind of connection teaches you something brutal and beautiful at the same time. The greatest wealth in life is being known. Not admired, not praised, known. If I could leave you with one truth, it would be this: success doesn't protect you from loneliness. Longevity doesn't protect you from loss. Only relationships, actively cared for, soften the edges of time. I am 80 years old now. I am still here, still learning, still remembering. And if this story reaches you before it's too late, then my friend didn't leave this world quietly after all. He left behind a lesson, and I intend to honor it.